The reunion had been Petra's idea. That was the part Waverley couldn't stop thinking about, even as she stood outside the glass doors of the Pemberton. The kind of hotel that made you feel underdressed just for looking at it. Her breath fogging in the November air, her fingers going numb around the strap of her bag. Petra, who had once been her best friend, who had texted her 3 weeks ago, "It'll be good to see everyone, you should come. It's been 10 years. Waverley Oakes was 32 years old. She was a senior data analyst at one of Toronto's largest logistics firms, the kind of person who could find patterns in spreadsheets that made her colleagues go quiet with something that looked, if you squinted, like awe. She had a good apartment in Leslieville, a cat named Biscuit, who hated everyone except her, and a mother who called every Sunday without fail. Her life was by any reasonable measure a good one. She knew all of this. She had told herself all of this on the drive over, the whole 40 minutes from her apartment, the highway slick and grey under the first real snow of the season. None of it made the next 10 seconds any easier. She pushed through the doors. The hotel ballroom had been done up in the school colours, burgundy and gold, which had never suited anyone, and there were little framed photos on every table, the kind that made everyone look slightly worse than they remembered themselves. A DJ was setting up in the corner, with the quiet professionalism of someone who knew exactly how these nights went. The bar was already 3 deep. Waverley recognized most of the faces within 30 seconds and made the tactical decision to get a drink before she recognized any of them loudly enough to matter. She was almost at the bar when she heard it. Waverley. The voice was exactly the same. That was the thing about Ethan Kress. He had always sounded so certain of himself, even when he had absolutely no right to be. She turned slowly, the way you turned toward a smell you weren't sure about. He looked, she thought distantly, almost exactly as she remembered him. A little softer around the jaw. A little more deliberate in the way he held his shoulders, like he'd had to practice standing like someone who'd made it. He was with 2 other people she half recognized, Kyle something and a woman in a red dress who was already bored. "Waverley Oakes," Ethan said, smiling in the way that meant he wanted something. "You came, apparently," she said. His eyes moved over her once, and just quickly enough that he might have thought she wouldn't notice. She noticed. She had spent most of her 20s learning to notice that exact thing, because noticing it early meant you could decide how much of yourself to offer before it happened. "You look," he started. "I know," she said pleasantly. "Drink?" She turned away before he could finish the sentence. The bartender poured her a glass of Pinot Gris and she took it with both hands and found a spot near the far wall where she could see the whole room without being in the middle of it. The data analyst part of her brain, which never fully turned off, began cataloguing. Who had come with someone, who was pretending they hadn't wanted to come, who was already calculating the fastest exit. There was a geography to these things. There always was. She was fine. This was fine. She would stay for an hour, see Marcy Tran, who had always been genuinely kind to her, and then she would drive home and watch something terrible on Netflix and give Biscuit an unreasonable amount of treats. That was the plan. The plan lasted about 20 minutes. She was near the photo wall, looking at a picture of the senior production of Grease in which she had operated a spotlight, and felt at the time that this was an honorable contribution. When Ethan found her again, he had Kyle with him now, and a 3rd man she didn't recognize, and a drink he'd had just enough of to think this was a good idea. "We were just talking," Ethan said, leaning against the wall beside her with the ease of someone who'd never once questioned whether he was welcome, about how much everyone's changed. "People do that," Waverley said, "some more than others." He glanced at her sideways. Not subtle. "You've—" He paused. It was a theatrical pause, the kind he'd always deployed when he wanted an audience. Kyle had the decency to look at his shoes. The 3rd man, the one she didn't know, had gone very still. "I mean, you were never small, Waverley, but—" "Stop," she said. He blinked. "What?" I said stop. She kept her voice level. She was very good at level. "You were about to say something about my body at a party where I'm a guest, not a subject for discussion, so I'm asking you to stop." Ethan's expression cycled through surprised, then amused, then something uglier. "It was just an observation." "Then keep it," she said, "to yourself." She set her glass down on a nearby table. She'd barely touched it, and turned to go, because staying in a conversation with Ethan Kress was a thing she'd spent a decade correctly deciding not to do. She had taken approximately 4 steps when she heard him say it, louder, to Kyle and the third man. God, she was always so sensitive. Some people just can't take a joke. Waverly stopped, not because she was going to turn around. She was absolutely not going to turn around. She knew better than to turn around. She had read enough, grown enough, made enough peace with herself in enough therapists' offices and quiet Sunday mornings to know that turning around accomplished nothing except giving him more of what he wanted. She was not going to turn around. She turned around. The third man was already looking at her. Not the way Ethan had looked at her, that inventory glance, measuring and dismissing, but directly, steadily, the way a person looked at something they found genuinely interesting. He was tall. That was the first thing. Not in the way that felt accidental, but in the way that suggested the rest of the room had simply arranged itself around him as a courtesy. Dark suit, no tie, the kind of face that a certain kind of novelist would spend 3 sentences on and still not get right. And he was watching Ethan the way you watched a small thing that didn't yet know it had made a mistake. "I missed the joke," the man said. His voice was quiet, measured. The accent was faintly European. She couldn't place it precisely, and he said it the way you said something when you had no intention of laughing. Ethan turned. The smile that reappeared on his face was the social one, the one that meant he had just noticed he'd miscalculated his audience. "It was nothing, man, old friends." "I see," the man said. He looked at Waverly. "Are you all right?" It was such a simple question. She had been asked it before, many times, by people who meant it various amounts. This man asked it like the answer was the only thing in the room that mattered. "I'm fine," she said. Force of habit. "You don't have to be," he said. She blinked. Ethan made a noise that was meant to be a laugh. "Seriously, it was nothing. She's being... I wasn't speaking to you." The man said it without looking at Ethan, which was, Waverly thought, either the most dismissive or the most dangerous thing she had ever seen done quietly at a party. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. Kyle found something urgent to attend to on the other side of the room. The man looked at her again, and something about being looked at that way, like she was a complete sentence, not a rough draft, made Waverly feel briefly, strangely, like she might do something embarrassing, like burst into tears in front of a stranger at her high school reunion in a hotel in Toronto, which was not how she had intended to spend her Thursday. She swallowed. "I was actually just leaving. I'll walk with you," he said. "If that's all right." She looked at him for a moment. "I don't know your name, Rafe," he said. He offered his hand. Rafe Vance Waverly Oakes. His handshake was firm, and he held it a half-second longer than necessary, not in a way that felt pushy, but in a way that felt like punctuation, like he was making sure she'd registered it. "Do you actually want to leave?" he said. "Or did you say that because it was the easiest thing?" She almost smiled. "Both. There's a terrace," he said, "cold but quiet." The terrace was, in fact, extremely cold. There were a handful of outdoor heaters doing their best and losing, and a string of lights that someone had strung without much conviction. The snow from earlier had crusted over the railing, and Waverly could see the lights of the city below, the orange smear of streetlights, the distant red and white of highway traffic, the CN Tower doing its patient, illuminated thing on the horizon the way it always did. She wrapped both hands around a fresh glass of something warm that a passing server had offered, and Rafe Vance stood beside her at the railing and didn't say anything immediately, which was the right call. "I hate these things," she said finally. "Then why come?" "Guilt," she said. "Obligation. Some combination of feeling like I should prove something and knowing intellectually that I don't need to and doing it anyway." She glanced at him. "You?" "I came for a meeting," he said. "It finished 2 hours ago. I'd booked a room for the night, and the lobby bar was full of a wedding party. So, he gestured at the ballroom behind them. I wondered, you gate-crashed my reunion. I gate-crashed your reunion, he agreed, entirely unapologetic. She laughed. It came out smaller than she expected, surprised at itself. Who is he? Rafe said, not quite a question, the one inside. Waverly looked out at the city for a moment. We dated, she said, briefly, in our last year of school. He spent 4 months being very charming, and then one night at a party he said something about my weight in front of a group of people, and I didn't say anything, and I've thought about that, about not saying anything, roughly once a week for the last 10 years. Rafe was quiet. I know, she said. It sounds like a lot of energy to spend on someone who clearly wasn't worth it. It sounds, he said carefully, like something that hurt. She looked at him, and like you've spent a long time trying to convince yourself it shouldn't have. The city lights blurred very slightly, and she looked back at them. Occupational habit, she said. I work in data. I'm very good at telling myself what the numbers say and ignoring what I actually feel about them. What do you feel? Right now, in general, she considered this seriously because he seemed to be asking it seriously. Like I take up the right amount of space, she said, most of the time, and then I walk into a room with someone like Ethan, and suddenly I'm 17 again and I'm... She stopped. Sorry. You didn't come out here for therapy. I didn't come out here for anything, he said. I came out here because I wanted to. She looked at him again. He was watching her with that same quality of attention, complete and unhurried, like she wasn't background noise, like she wasn't something to get through on the way to something more interesting. What do you do? She asked. For work. The meeting. Real estate, he said. Primarily things. Vague, she noted. I'm working on being less so, he said, and there was something dry in his voice that she found she liked. I hold on to information by reflex. Old habit. Where are you from originally? My father was Czech. My mother was from Halifax. I spent my 20s in Europe. He paused. I sound like a passport. She did laugh this time properly. A well-traveled one. He smiled. It did something interesting to his face, softened the angles of it in a way that felt like a concession, like something he didn't give easily. They stayed out there for a long time. The city kept doing its patient, indifferent thing below them. The string lights buzzed and flickered occasionally, and neither of them moved to go back inside. He asked her about her work, and actually listened to the answer, which was not nothing. Most people's eyes glazed slightly when she said logistics analytics, and she told him about the model she'd built that had saved the company's Eastern distribution network from a series of compounding delays last winter, and he asked follow-up questions that suggested he'd understood the first thing she'd said, which almost never happened. She asked about his work, and he told her, gradually, in pieces, about the properties he managed, and a development project in Montreal he was currently fighting the city over, and the particular bureaucratic frustration of heritage designation. He was funny about it. Not performatively funny, not the kind of funny that waited for you to notice it, just precise and occasionally very dry, and she found herself laughing at things she hadn't expected to find funny. At some point, the lights inside the ballroom shifted to something slower, and someone had turned the music up. Through the glass doors, she could see Ethan near the bar, holding court with a group of people who were laughing at whatever he'd just said. He caught her eye through the glass. She could see the moment he registered that she was on the terrace with Rafe, that Rafe was someone worth noticing, and his expression flickered into something that wasn't quite a smile. She looked away. He's looking, Rafe said, not looking himself. I know. Does it bother you? No, she said, and was surprised to find it was true. Rafe set his glass down on the railing. He turned to face her more fully, which meant she had to look at him, which she did. I'd like to take you to dinner, he said. Not tonight, this week, if you're available. Tomorrow, if you want to get out ahead of it. His voice was even, direct, not performative. No elaborate setup, no build-up. Just the statement itself laid flat like something he'd thought through and decided on. I know that's abrupt. It is, she agreed. Is it too much? She thought about it properly, the way she thought about things that mattered. She was 32. She was good at her job, and she knew who she was, and she didn't need anything from this man or from anyone who looked like him or sounded like him or made her feel, as he currently did, like being in the same space as her was a thing he'd chosen freely and without reservation. She didn't need it. No, she said. It's not too much. His expression shifted, and there it was again, that thing in his face that felt like a door opening brief and certain. Good, he said. She gave him her number on a cocktail napkin because neither of them had their phone out, and it felt right, somehow, to do it that way. Old-fashioned, a little ridiculous, the kind of thing she'd tell Marcy about tomorrow, and Marcy would say only you, Waverley in the fond way she had. She went back inside at 10:30. Rafe had a call he had to make, something that had apparently come in on his phone while they'd been talking, and he'd silenced without explanation, which she filed away as a thing she'd think about later. He walked her to the door of the ballroom and said good night in the way that meant he'd be in touch. Not in the way that meant probably not. Ethan was still at the bar. He watched her come back in. His gaze moved past her to the door, then back to her, calculating. He excused himself from his group with some murmured thing and crossed toward her with the confidence of someone who'd decided this was his moment. "Who was that?" he asked. Not trying to be friendly now, just wanting to know. "Someone I met tonight," Waverley said. "He with the company. I've seen him at a few things." "I have no idea," she said honestly. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. He had that look, the one she remembered from 17, the one he'd gotten when a situation wasn't resolving the way he'd expected. "Look," he started, "earlier, I didn't mean it to come out like that." "You know I don't actually, Ethan," she said, not unkindly, just clearly. "You don't need to explain it to me. I've been explaining it to myself for 10 years. I'm done." He blinked. "Have a good night," she said. Genuinely. She found Marcy near the photo wall, exactly where she'd expected her to be, and they hugged the way old friends hugged when it had been too long. And Marcy said, "You look amazing," in the way that meant she meant it. And Waverley said, "So do you." And they spent 40 minutes talking about Marcy's daughter and Waverley's job, and the absolute state of the 401 in winter, and it was easy and warm, and reminded her of why she'd come. She left at 11. In the car, driving home through the late Toronto dark, the city showing its wintertime face, salt grey and lit up and utterly itself. She thought about the terrace and the string lights and the way Rafe Vance had listened to her talk about logistics algorithms like it was the most natural thing in the world, about how he'd looked at Ethan, about the cocktail napkin folded into his breast pocket. Her phone buzzed just as she was pulling into her street. The dinner. Tomorrow works, if you mean it. She sat in the parked car for a moment. Outside, the snow had started again, quiet and deliberate, covering the grey slush on the sidewalk with something clean. She typed back, "I meant it." Then she went inside, made tea, and sat with biscuit on her lap for a long time while the snow came down outside the window, and the city went about its quiet, ongoing business of being exactly what it was. The restaurant was on King Street, the kind of place that didn't need a sign outside because the people who knew about it knew, and the people who didn't weren't the intended audience. Waverley had walked past it 6 times and never gone in. The maitre d' greeted Rafe by name. She noted this without making a face about it, which took a small amount of effort. They were given a corner table near a window that looked out on the street, and outside the snow was still going, softer now, the evening version of it, and the King streetcar went by in its orange certainty, and the whole thing looked, Waverley thought, almost deliberately cinematic, like the city was trying too hard. She ordered the halibut. Rafe ordered something that the server recommended in French, which Rafe answered in kind, fluently and briefly, in a way that suggested this wasn't performance. He caught her watching and said, simply, "My mother's family, Halifax French?" she said. Stubbornly, he said. They talked easily, more easily than she'd expected, and she'd set her expectations deliberately low as a precaution. She learned that he was 38, that he'd started working in real estate in his late 20s after something else he was vague about in exactly the way he'd been vague the night before, and she got the sense. Not alarm, just information, that there were rooms in this person she hadn't been shown yet. She didn't push. She had rooms too. He asked about her family. She told him about her mother in Burlington, who had been a nurse for 30 years and had opinions about everything, and was right about approximately 70% of them, which was a higher rate than most people, but still left a solid 30% for argument. Her dad had died 6 years ago. She said it plainly, the way she'd learned to say it, not to rush past it, not to make it into a production, just to let it sit in the conversation as the true thing it was. Rafe didn't rush past it either. He said he was sorry. He asked one careful question about what her father had been like. She told him about the Sunday morning crosswords, done in pen, and Rafe said his father had done the same thing, and she thought, there it is, there's the thing. Not the romance novel version, not lightning or a caught breath. Just the quiet, specific recognition of two people who have been paying attention finding, to their own mild surprise, something to recognize. Dessert arrived. She'd ordered it without apology, a chocolate thing with hazelnuts, and Rafe had raised his water glass as she'd ordered it in a small, private toast, and they were deep into something about the ethics of heritage designation when his phone lit up on the table. He looked at it. Something in his face changed, not dramatically, not a scene, just the way a person's face changed when a particular kind of information arrived. He excused himself. He was gone for 4 minutes. She timed it absently, because she timed things absently. It was just how her brain worked. When he came back, he sat down and picked up his fork and then set it down again. "I have to tell you something," he said. She waited. "The meeting I was at 2 nights ago," he said. "At the hotel. I should have said it was with investors in a development project that's currently in a dispute." He paused. "The other party in the dispute is a man named Ethan Kress." She went very still. "His family's company owns the heritage-designated building I'm trying to develop," Rafe said, carefully and evenly. "I didn't know who he was to you when I walked onto that terrace. I knew his name. I'd seen him across a room. I didn't associate. I didn't know." He looked at her. "I found out this morning when my assistant pulled together the background on his family holdings." Waverly set her fork down. "I don't want you to hear it from somewhere else," he said, "and think I'd known and said nothing." The streetcar went by outside. The snow kept coming. She thought about what it would be like to be the kind of person who processed this quickly and cleanly, who had a ready response for the moment a date told you he was in a business dispute with the first person who'd ever made you feel like your body was a problem to be managed in front of a crowd. She was not, it turned out, that kind of person. She was the kind of person who had to sit with it for a moment, turn it over, look at it from a few angles, which she did, while Rafe waited without filling the silence. "What kind of dispute?" she said finally. "He's blocking permits. His company owns the adjacent property, and they're arguing sight lines." He paused. "It's solvable. Legally, slowly. His lawyers are very good at slowly. Are you going to win?" "Yes," he said, with a certainty that wasn't boastful, just factual. "It'll take time." She picked her fork back up. She took a bite of the chocolate thing, which was, it had to be said, exceptional. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Of course. It's not." She started, then thought about how to say it. "It doesn't change anything. Between us. I need you to know that." She looked at him steadily. "He doesn't get to take up that much space." Something shifted in Rafe's face. That door again, opening. "No," he said quietly. "He doesn't." She stayed until the restaurant was nearly empty. The snow outside had stopped at some point without either of them noticing. Rafe walked her to the cab she'd booked. She'd been very firm about the cab, and he'd been very good about it, which told her something. And on the sidewalk under the streetlight, he said, "I'd like to see you again." "I know," she said. "Is that a yes?" "It's an obviously," she said. The cab came. She got in. She watched him through the window as the driver pulled into traffic, standing on the sidewalk in the falling quiet city, with his hands in his coat pockets, watching the cab until it turned. 3 weeks later, Waverley was in her apartment on a Saturday morning. Spreadsheet open, Biscuit on the arm of the couch performing his slow blink critique of her data methodology, when her phone rang with a call from Marcy. "I'm going to tell you something," Marcy said, "and I need you to be calm." "I'm always calm," Waverley said. "You are decidedly not always calm. Anyway." "Ethan Kress, his company's downtown development, the one by the waterfront, you know the one." "I know the one," Waverley said, carefully. "The Heritage Board rejected their permit appeal this morning. Unanimous. It's been all over the architecture community. Apparently they've been fighting it for months, and someone filed a counter-application that was incredibly well documented, and it completely undermined their case, like surgically." Marcy paused. "Do you know anything about this?" "Why would I know anything about this?" "Because," Marcy said, "I looked up the counter-applicant, and it's a development company called Vance Holdings. And I seem to recall that you mentioned, several times, a man named Rafe. Marcy, I'm just connecting dots. Those are not your dots to connect, Waverley." Marcy's voice softened. "Are you happy?" Waverley looked out the window. The late November light was doing the thing it did in Toronto in the weeks before Christmas. Slanted and golden and very briefly forgiving. The kind of light that made the city look like it was trying to be gentle with you. She thought about a terrace in the cold, a cocktail napkin, a man who had asked, "Are you all right?" like it was the only question in the room. She thought about sitting across a table with someone who ordered dessert for themselves and raised a water glass when she ordered hers, who had told her an uncomfortable truth because she deserved to have it, who called her Waverley, always her whole name, and had not once in 3 weeks looked at her like she was something to be assessed and found wanting or found sufficient or found anything at all except exactly what she was. "Yeah," she said. "I'm happy. Good," Marcy said firmly. "You deserve it, obviously. I've been saying so for 10 years. After she hung up, Waverley sat for a moment longer. Then she sent Rafe a text that said, "Heritage Board news today. How about dinner tonight? My turn to pick." His reply came in under a minute. "Tell me where, I'll be there." She smiled. She closed the spreadsheet. She looked at Biscuit, who regarded her with the dignified neutrality he maintained toward all human emotional developments. Outside, the city was already making its ordinary Saturday noise. The distant streetcar, a dog barking somewhere, the neighbor's kid on a bike despite the cold, and the sun was on the buildings across the street, and everything that had been heavy was, for the moment, exactly the right weight.